Hello friends, welcome to Debbie Mama's Place. I am Debbie Mama. Last week we began talking about the whole gospel and we talked about being a living sacrifice. Tonight, as we continue our discussion of living out the whole gospel, we must look at the act of submission. Back in June this year, I discussed the act of letting go and surrendering to God in a previous Debbie Mama's Place. If you didn't catch it, I hope you'll go back and watch it later after this video. It will help you to recognize your need to submit to God first, with a few tips on how to do just that. Let me start with a story. Somehow being born with red hair means you're a strong-willed child. You're labeled stubborn, you lack the ability to pay attention, and that you are completely disobedient to your parents, and all adults in general. I was one of those so labeled kids. I had my own mind, my own way, my own desires, and nothing was going to stop me from getting my way. So much so that I often found myself in trouble with mom and dad. I even labeled myself a rebel for decades. But somewhere down the road, and it was a long, long road, let me tell you, I decided to submit my will to the authorities over me. And when I did right and followed the rules, I didn't get into trouble. I found the rebellious natural Debbie died, and the spirit-filled Debbie came to life. I made the conscious choice to submit. Now, since we just discussed the issue of letting go and surrendering to God just a few months ago, I want to use this time to focus on to whom God has given authority and how we, as His children, should act toward them. Well, first, what is submission? Submission means giving someone else control over you, your things, your family, your money, your choices, and your life. For example, you do it all the time in everyday life without ever even thinking about it. For instance, when I'm driving, I submit to other drivers by allowing them to come into my lane. As an American, I submit to the government by following the established laws. As I'm working, I submit to my boss when he brings me work to complete. As a student, I submit to the teacher's syllabus for the semester and I complete all the assigned schoolwork. No matter what, however, I still have a choice in all of those things. But every decision has a consequence, whether good or bad. If you're driving and you don't let the car in, you're going to have an accident. At work, if you don't do the assignment, you're going to get fired. Your government, if you don't follow the rules and the laws, you can get arrested. And at school, if you don't do the schoolwork, you're going to flunk out. Similarly, when you do right, then good things happen. The Apostle Paul takes a little time in his letter to the Roman church to discuss how we are to submit to these authorities. Well, let's take a look at the first 7 verses in chapter 13. It starts out, "Everyone must submit themselves to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." All right, I'm not about to get into the subject of politics, so don't turn me off too quickly. but I am going to talk about real life, whole gospel living. Many of you might be offended by the mere fact that I'm telling you to submit to anyone. If so, be offended, but don't turn away from the truth of God's word. If you received the message and you believed in Jesus Christ, you must break the notion that you have the right to live autonomously. Well, am I meddling yet? Yeah, I think I am. But hear me. To fully live out the whole gospel of Jesus Christ, you need to know the whole gospel, and that does include submission to governing authorities. Paul makes sure to let the Roman church know that God placed these people in authority over everyone. How crazy is it to think that God chooses the men and women we are to submit to in our governments? But it's true. There's no denying what Romans 13:1 says. It says, there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. These authorities are considered rulers, servants, judges, even agents of wrath. Yikes! Oh my gosh! People that God puts in positions of authority have a lot of power and responsibility. But it's not just those in the government who have this God-given authority. If you look closer at verse 1, you'll see that it states, submit themselves to governing authorities. Who submits? We do. Who governs? Well, let's take a look. People like the government of the country, the principal of your school, a board of directors, the police chief, your boss, your teacher, your spouse, your parents, no matter how old you are, by the way, and your pastor. Oh yes, her too. The list can and does go on. And God puts them in these positions of authority, and sometimes they abuse it, I know, but we are still to submit to them. Why, you ask? Hey, I'm glad you asked. Paul writes in 13:5 that, therefore it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. He also writes in verse 2 that consequently, those who rebel against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So you're to submit because you need to have a clear conscience and not rebel against what God has instituted. As Christians, we are supposed to be completely, and I mean completely, dependent on God and not live as individuals. I know that this goes against the grain of every person living in a democratic society, but that is the truth. That is the whole gospel. The Gospels in the New Testament are rife with examples of Jesus saying he doesn't do anything that the Father does not tell him to do, and in areas where he prays, not my will, but yours be done. See, Jesus Christ is our example of how to respond to the Father in our everyday life. So it's a good thing to let go of your individuality and autonomy and submit to governing authorities. By doing so, you are submitting to God and finding freedom from fear of those who are in charge. You are fully trusting that God knows exactly what he's doing. Now, I never said it was easy, but by confessing the sin of rebellion before God, he offers you the strength you need to have peace. Submitting to governing authorities shows the world that Jesus is in charge of your life. You are publicly living out the whole gospel. It opens avenues for you to walk with the weak, which is exactly what we're going to talk about next week in our final week in Romans. So start submitting to God by submitting to all types of governing authorities, and then you'll have peace. So I'd love it for you to go out, be blessed, and be a blessing. Good night.